Yo, what up? Welcome to another episode of the Oakland Warriors podcast. I'm Patrick, flying solo. So, all hell has broken loose with the Warriors, it feels like. It was reported by Shams that everyone but Steph Curry is available in a trade. And you got to take that with a grain of salt, but it's also one of those things where that's how bad it is. For the second straight game, they got blown out, this time by the New Orleans Pelicans, 141-105, and that's a few days after getting blown out by the Toronto Raptors, 133-118, both at home. After that 5-game winning streak where things felt pretty good, the Warriors have gone 2-6. And let's be honest, it's looking pretty bad, and there's a bunch of things to talk about. First, I want to say, now that Draymond is coming back, I think he will help them on the court, but we know that they weren't playing that well to begin with when he was not suspended. That being said, other guys weren't playing as bad, or were playing worse back then too. So Clay is playing better. Wiggins is still bad, inconsistent, but he's been a little bit better. And then, some of the younger guys have taken a step up. But let's face facts, this team is completely disjointed. I think ever since that Denver loss where Jokic hit that buzzer beater just past half court bank three-pointer and the Warriors blew an 18-point lead in the final 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. And then afterwards, it was leaked that Kuminga was unhappy and lost faith in Steve Kerr. I feel like that is the gut punch that just ended this, right? Like, in hindsight, they have not been able to recover from that. Yes, they beat Detroit, but that's Detroit. Detroit has 3 wins to 30-something losses right now. So you can't count that. And plus, that was a game where the Warriors struggled to put that one away. It wasn't a clear victory. So ever since then, I think the Warriors, as currently constructed, can't function that way. Yes, Peyton is hurt. Yes, Chris Paul broke his finger, but with Chris Paul, that's what you gamble with a 38-year-old dude who has broken hands, strained hamstrings, all this stuff. It was nice, I guess, to have him for a little bit, but he's clearly one of the biggest trade chips that the Warriors have. It's funny because I remember talking to Dr. Pandya at the beginning of the season, and I half jokingly, tongue-in-cheekishly said, "What are the odds? Or do you think that Chris Paul will be here after the trade deadline?" And we both thought that he would be because I was like, things are gonna have to be pretty dang bad to just tear the house down like that and to use that trade chip. And here we are. And honestly, they're probably worse than I could have ever imagined. Like, looking at the Warriors right now, they're old. Even Steph, with all the wear and tear and the load he's having to carry, and also this is taxing on him too. He's been playing poorly. Clay has been shooting better, but we know that Clay's ceiling for his post injuries, it's been reached, right? And will he stay at that ceiling? No, he's fallen off of it. Will he reach it? Maybe one every few games, right? And also defensively, he can't stay in front of quicker dudes anymore. And then you have the young guys who just aren't there yet. I've said this before, and the Warriors, they messed up. They did not thread the needle properly. That is on Kerr. That is on the organization for picking and choosing the wrong spots, plain and simple, right? Like, hey, if Kuminga and Moody had gotten some of the minutes that Anthony Lamb swiped last year, that Kerr gave to this two-way guy, because the Warriors were in a hole, because Draymond put them in that hole, because he blew up the chemistry. Plain and simple. Yes, there's other things that came up, but maybe I'm just a big defender of the youth because I don't like seeing them just blamed for everything. But, this threading of the needle is a failure. Plain and simple. It's a failure. And even with somebody like Pods and Trace Jackson Davis, as well as they've been playing, think about it. If this team tried to use them a lot in the playoffs, they just would be more prone to mistakes. You can't rely on them as much as other dudes. And the way that they're playing so many minutes right now, as much as I like them, I mean, even if they were to turn it around a little bit, it's tough. It's tough to see happening. The chemistry is just blown. And one thing I got to take issue with is I've listened to some national podcasts. I listened to the Zach Lowe podcast. I listened to the Bill Simmons podcast talking about the Warriors. And I read some tweets from Ryan Russillo. I like those dudes. I listen to them when they do talk about the Golden State Warriors. But I'm a little bothered by this narrative that's going around that Kuminga is some dude who shouldn't be speaking up, that is some kind of malcontent, like a bad teammate who doesn't deserve to speak up because he hasn't done anything. I think that's BS. I think that's just from an outsider's perspective, a bunch of guys who have looked at the dynasty and just seen the vets and probably know the vets and like the vets and want to have the vets have a good relationship with the vets moving into the future in terms of working with them in media, working with them in having them on as interviews or being guests on their shows. I mean, all that stuff, right? So I think it's easy from the outside to blame the young guys. And I think Kuminga, I still stand that it would be dumb to trade him. But at this point, I'm just so tired of seeing what they got. I'm not saying just, do whatever, but you have to look at all kinds of options if you're willing to go that far. Because what we're seeing now is a terrible product. And it felt like when Steve Kerr put Wiggins and Kuminga in the starting lineup against Toronto, he was kind of setting them up to fail, to be honest, right? It's almost like one of these, I told you so. Look at this. This is what I'm talking about. And I'm not saying that they're great together. I think what is the problem now is that Andrew Wiggins just isn't very good. And then also, when you have those two guys out there, it's not like having Iguodala. It's not like having Kevin Durant, because you need other playmakers, other ball handlers, other creators, other quote unquote connectors, right? And so if you put them out there with Looney or with Trace Jackson Davis, or, that's not what they need to succeed. They need a Steph, they need a Draymond, they would have needed a Chris Paul, and that would have put them in the best situation to succeed. But don't get me wrong, the way Wiggins is playing right now, he's bad. He is playing bad. I don't know what is wrong with that dude, but I've said before, it's like you look at Clay, he played poorly, he's playing better, but Clay, I mean, I would kill. I was going to say he would kill to have Wiggins' youth and health, right? But I would kill for Clay to be 28 years old without any leg injuries. Do you remember how good Clay was when he was 28? And it's disappointing that Wiggins just ain't there. Draymond's coming back. Like I said, he's going to help on the court. But, the irony is the Warriors are counting on some guy, relying on some guy to be the savior when he's the one that started this whole blow up in the first place. You know what I mean? I was going through some old articles around the time of Dre punching Poole and how Steve Kerr didn't suspend, or I know it wasn't his call, but Steve Kerr, Lacob, Myers, they didn't suspend Draymond for ring night. And the idea is that if it was during the regular season and not the opening night of the ring night and all that stuff, they would have probably suspended him. And so, I mean, it's just, the basketball gods never mess around, and they've played with it too much. And I think the hubris the enabling, the lack of accountability. It's all there, and it's coming home to roost. And it's disappointing because, I mean, let's face facts. Beyond last season, you go to this season, things look good at 6-2, but you know what it was? It was Draymond not being around, basically abandoning the team by, this quote unquote leadership where he gets suspended twice. You know what I mean? And he gets suspended twice. Wiggins isn't playing well. Clay isn't playing well. Looney is feeling the effects of all these consecutive games and whatnot. And Steph is playing well, and then the bench is playing well. So let's not get it twisted and start pointing at the youngsters for any of this. Pods and Trace Jackson-Davis are overperforming, especially in a Golden State Warriors context, as rookies. You know what I mean? Like, they are doing so much. So there's no blame there. But then Kuminga and Moody, hey, Moody has been as silent as a Buddhist monk, right? And that hasn't gotten him anywhere. And when he plays well. And Kuminga, he's been yo-yoed for so long. I have no problem with him speaking up. You're going to take issue with that more than Draymond getting suspended? Draymond cost this. You know what I mean? He's the one. And I've always said I appreciate what he's done on the court and what he's brought. And to me, it's not about the losing. I've seen losing with his team, right, over the years before Steph, into the the glory days of the 90s and the 80s. I've seen that. And it's just how they're losing and how they got to this point. And that's what happens. And this is how empires fall. Not all great teams go out the way they want to. You know what I mean? And it's a shame because everything felt like it was lined up. I know I kind of alluded to this in the previous couple of episodes, but like everything was lined up to have this Spursian, San Antonio Spurs-like transition to the future. Name me a dynasty that had 3 lottery picks in 2 years. And yes, the Wiseman pick did not work out. But hey, like it made sense at the time. People, I wanted Anthony Edwards as well, and I wanted Halliburton. But it is what it is. And that story is it's his own epic story of terrible circumstances and just fits and starts, all that stuff, And then you look at Kuminga, right? It's like, come on, like we look at Kuminga and we look at the people drafted after him, whether it's Wagner, and then after Moody, if it's Sengun, Trey Murphy III, who I actually also really liked. We don't know how good Moody can be. I see people looking at the Warriors youngsters and being like, I don't see any stars here. And they may be right. As big of a fan as I am of Kuminga, it's like you want to see him succeed in the context of being brought up in this team. You don't want him to put him out there as like the lone potential star on a bad team just yet. And it's like, hey, maybe he turns out to be the first player on a contender, the best player. Maybe he's second, maybe he's third, maybe he's fourth. Is he more and not in terms of playing style, but more in terms of like their ceiling for like where they could slot on a title team? Is he more of a potential Kawhi down the road, or is he more of an Aaron Gordon, right? Some guy who can do some things, but is ultimately best suited to be a cog in a role player on a title team, not a role player on a bad team, because Aaron Gordon would probably be, maybe third or second on a terrible team, right? He was on Orlando, but a fourth best player. So it's coming at first, second, third, fourth. We don't know yet. That's the whole point. We don't know. We've seen flashes where he could be, is he a 1 or 2? But then we also see his shortcomings. But that's the problem with the way the Warriors have done this. They've had a few shots at finding that bridge player, if you include Poole in that, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out. So just the way it's been handled, and again, I hate to say it, but it all started with a punch. It all started with a punch, and it just destroyed everything afterwards. No, the Warriors weren't built last season with all the youngsters to be a dominating team, but they also weren't built to be as terrible as they were. You know what I mean? That punch happened. You lost a lot of dudes. Poole went off his own way. Who knows where Wiggins is now? And so, make some moves. DeJounte Murray is a name that's going around. Slater mentioned that one. Other people have mentioned that one. And heck, let's do it. Do something, because when you're Joe Lacob, it's like, at the end of the day, the product is bad. Because earlier in the season, the product was bad, but you're like, okay, there's some hope here. There's a path. We've seen them figure stuff out before, but right now, this is beyond that. This is like bad team. Hey, maybe Draymond comes back and everything is all good, and they figure out their lineups and they start Steph, Clay, Kuminga, Draymond, and Trace Jackson Davis, and that ends up working out. And then you bring Pods, Wiggins, Looney off the bench, Moody. Maybe you got something there. Maybe eventually Gary Payton II comes back and he can actually play for a while. Or, maybe you package Chris Paul, Wiggins, and or Moody, and or picks, and try to get something, right? I've said that if you trade Wiggins and if you trade Kuminga, you're going to be at a athleticism deficit, a massive one, especially if you don't have Gary Payton II. And even if he does come back, you can't rely on him. The dude is injury prone. Great dude, but it is what it is, right? And then, getting a center. Who's a center that's out there? People, Warriors fans can toss out names. Warriors media guys can toss out names, but are they available? What would it take? I love Nick Claxton. How do you get Nick Claxton? I'll take Jared Allen. How do you get Jared Allen? Are these guys even worth trading? Sure, anybody can be moved, but you would have to overpay if they're not on the block. Is Siakam a guy that you want to mess with because he's not guaranteeing an extension? I mean, you would have to re-sign him to make it worth it, unless you just wipe the slate clean. I don't think Siakam puts this Warriors team over anything. He creates some issues still, depending on who you still have on your roster in terms of outside shooting, spreading the floor and whatnot. So, as many people have said, the Warriors are not one trade away from being a contender at this point. There's too much damage done, and they could obviously still make the playoffs and then catch lightning in a bottle for 16 wins. Yeah, that's what us Warriors fans are hoping for, praying for. That championship DNA that was just there. But let's face facts. This is not 2017, not 2018, and this Warriors team doesn't have those two-way players. It doesn't have these guys that can, lock it down and just do it, right? They haven't built that up. And then the old guys, they just can't. Who is your point of attack guy without Gary Payton II? It used to be Clay. And then in the death lineup, you had Iguodala. You had even Kevin Durant. And before that, Harrison Barnes, all these switchable dudes. And now you have a bunch of guys who can do a little bit of something, because Clay can't do that on defense. He can guard small forwards and whatnot, but he can't guard quick two guards and crazy quick point guards. So he's just less dimensional, right? And then you have the young guys who still make mistakes, and so they're not exactly there yet. And that's on the team. That's on Kerr. And the booing and all that stuff, it's again, I don't speak for everybody, but for me, the disappointment is how this is all going down. The mistakes that they made. They deserve to have some arrogance, right? But this is what happens when you kind of play with fire a little bit, right? Kerr said they had this under control after the punch, and that they had built equity in the team and what they'd built up and how they were going to move forward. And that got spent. That equity ain't there no more. That is all gone. That was spent somewhere in the middle of last season. And, here they are. So I'm all for a trade. Let's change this up. Plain and simple. I don't want to trade Kuminga. I've said that. I did an episode about that. I still agree with that. But if you're looking at like, let's trade anybody, hey, anybody's on the table. I mean, I really don't think Draymond and Clay are on the table, but because Kerr and Steph wouldn't want that. But hey, what we're seeing right now is terrible. And it sucks to me because, like, I know that, in that Toronto game, Scotty Barnes, his whole thing was that he is just a great, smart, all-around player, right? His thing was like he couldn't shoot well from the outside. He's better now. But Kuminga was his draft class. And to see how far Scotty Barnes has come and to know that Kuminga has not had the chance to get there. And don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting Kuminga his rookie year to play that much, right? But last year and then some of the stuff this year, like, speak up. So, do it. Because, you're catching the short end of the stick here. I started doing these community posts, these polls, these questions on YouTube. It's kind of fun. Just days I can't do episodes, I just like ask a question and whatnot, and I just wanted to read some of the results of a couple of them. I said, here's the thing. What did you think of Draymond's podcast and story about crying with Steve Kerr and saying he was going to retire? And then Adam Silver convinced him not to. 59% said not buying it. Rich Paul just crafted an excellent PR narrative. 23% said, I believe him. He's the victim of his reputation and welcome back. 18% said, doesn't matter. Dre wrecked this team the day he punched Poole. So 59% not buying it. 23% said, yes, believe him. And then 18% say, doesn't matter. And my personal take on that thing, it's like I've said before, again, Draymond has every right to talk, but like I am so tired of him talking. I've said before, he paints himself as the victim in so many of these things. End of last season, he's talking about how his leadership was taken away from him. Come on, man. And that's why. Like, I'm not unthankful for what he's done on the court and in the 4 titles, and forgiving of some of the stuff that he's done on the court to blow a title, to cost us Kevin Durant. Like, whatever. I mean, Kevin Durant was already on his way out, and et cetera, et cetera. The 2016 title, that still burns. But like, that's fine. But like all this stuff where he punched Poole, he's acting like something was done to him. He wasn't even suspended by the Warriors. Something was done to him. And so he could not be a leader the way he wanted to. Well, you know what? You weren't a leader the way you wanted to when you punched Poole. And that was it. And now I said he's costing Steph his prime. People can argue with me whether or not Steph is in his prime. Clearly, he is struggling right now. But in general, when we're talking about wasting Steph's, this part of his career, that's Draymond, man. How many games has he abandoned the Warriors by getting ejected, getting suspended, and not being there, not being smart, and sticking with his team when they needed him? This all fell apart. I mean, remember, it was that game, that Suns game where Steve Kerr changed the second half starting lineup. He replaced Wiggins with Podziemski and Looney with Kuminga. So basically it was Steph, Clay, Podziemski, Kuminga, Draymond in center. And they were playing well. That's a decent lineup, especially the way Pods was playing back then. You had shooting, you had ball handling, you had athleticism, you had youth, you had defense, more or less, I mean, Pods whatever. But he tries, he battles, and that worked for a little bit until Dre disappeared. So here we are. He says he's costed the Warriors a lot. Man, somebody should ask him to list what he's cost the Warriors. I'd want to hear that, because it always feels like he's just trying to talk his way out of stuff. And then this whole idea of like retiring. I mean, I honestly think it's just, come on. He has $100 million contract on the table. He's not going to leave the NBA with his reputation being shredded. And he's not going to leave with his last basketball action being smacking Nurkic in the face and getting ejected for getting grabbed on the hip. So, I don't know. It is what it is. It's just an opinion. But, the whole thing with it was all very well crafted. Draymond is very smart, and he's very good at media stuff, and Rich Paul and whomever else PR wise is helpful. So I'm going to say what I said at the end of last season. I'm going to pull for Draymond on the court and just try to cancel the noise off of it. Unfortunately, a lot of it has just been off of it lately. So it is what it is. I was willing to just move on, as a lot of Warriors fans were. Things were good vibes, but stuff just doesn't go away because you hope it will. Anyway, another thing is this was my question: what's your ideal Warriors starting lineup? 75% said Steph, Clay, Kuminga, Draymond, Trace Jackson Davis. That's the one I want to see. Yeah, Trace Jackson Davis makes some mistakes and, struggles against like bigger, more experienced, skilled centers. But yeah, maybe swap Looney in for some of those. But who knows? I'll take that one. The one that got the least was 3%. Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond. And then a lot of people just don't want to see Clay or Wiggins in the lineup at all. So it is what it is. But I will end this by, saying, yeah, check out these polls. It's kind of fun to interact with folks. I don't have to do a podcast episode to have some opinions with y'all. But also it's like, hey, thank God it's just basketball, right? It's just sports. So we'll see what happens as these weeks go by. But hope you guys are staying happy with other things, and take care of your mental on this, because this is a drag, yo. All right, that's all I got.